Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Crafti. Today we're going to talk about surface design. Now, if you haven't already watched the episode about Krita, you need to go back and rewatch that because that's the software that I'm going to use when I'm doing a lot of the design work in this video. So the first thing we need to cover is what exactly is surface design. Surface design is exactly what it sounds like. It's a design meant to go on the surface of an object in order to improve the way it looks or the way it functions. So there's a couple of different types of surface design. The first type is just a simple panel type design. It's like what you would see on a shirt or something like this cotton fabric panel from Joann's. The next is a repeat pattern. It has a standard repeat to it, and it's usually like in a line or in diagonals. Next is what's called a ditzy pattern or a scatter pattern or a toss pattern, and it just looks like it's kind of been thrown at whatever it's on, but it actually does have a set pattern to it. The things are in a line, you just can't automatically tell. And finally is what I call a linear pattern or an edge pattern, and it's just one long pattern on the edge of fabric. And you can see here from fabric.com, there's a few examples there, and it's what would be on the long edge of your fabric. So the first thing we're going to go over are single and repeat patterns. This is the same process for everything that we're going to talk about, and it's the resource gathering process. For me, it started with this little frog stamp cutout thing. So what I'm going to do is make a Pinterest board with it, and then I'm going to go and look for other resources that are going to help me come up with the design that I want for this singular pattern. And what I really want to do is take this frog as inspiration, and I want to do it with a cat instead, specifically a cat that I used to have called Binks. So I'm going to go and look for other cats in the style that I'm going for, that paper cutout style. And I'm going to actually get some pictures of Binks. I'm going to download everything and put it nice and neat in the same place in a folder, and then I'm going to open up a document in Krita to work on. So I'm going to import all of my reference images into this document and kind of set it up the way I want it. You can set it up however you want it. If you want to do different windows open, you can do that. I like to have all of my stuff actually in Krita. Then what I'm going to do is take those reference images of my actual cat, of Binks, and I'm going to trace him in a few different perspectives and see which ones I like best for the composition that I have in mind. Now, when I say composition, I mean the parts of the image that make the whole image. So, for example, the frog would be a piece of the composition, the flowers, the stars, the shape of the background itself, those little lines at the top, those are all part of the overall composition. And I have a few different poses that I liked for this one. You'll see that I did have some flowers pulled to put in my design, but I ended up not liking the flowers and I just left them out. So you can kind of ignore those. And I do want to remind everybody that I am using just a mouse and the tools we talked about in the last video. I don't have a tablet or anything like that. Another thing is that even though it looks like I'm going really, really fast here, these videos are sped up about 1,000% at minimum. So I'm actually going really, really slow. A lot of this took days. So don't get discouraged that you can't go as quickly as it looks like I'm going on the screen. I'm not actually going that fast. So once you have a composition that you like, and I liked this angle and this perspective, I had a little bit of an issue making it look the way I wanted to with the face. That's obviously a cat. It looks like a cat, but it doesn't look like my cat. And I wanted it to look like my cat. So I made a mock-up of what I wanted the final to look like. And you can see this, the flowers are included with this. And then I saved it as a JPEG file and I printed it out at work. And the work printer we have is just a black and white printer. And I went and traced over it with a pencil. And then I sketched it in a sketchbook and scanned it back in. And you can see here that it's much more detailed and it actually looks a lot more like that picture. So what I'm going to do is right click that layer and then select opaque replace and change it to a color I can see better. And then I'm going to change that layer from normal to overlay. So it's just going to overlay the image. Then I'm going to select parts of the drawing that I feel like maybe the perspective was off or the proportions not right, and I'm just going to use the select tool with the transform tool to change that and maybe erase a few things that I feel like I could do better with the Bezier curve tool than I did freehand. Once I have the sketch the way I want it, for my guide, I'm going to go through and actually start sketching it with my mouse. Now remember, with a mouse, you don't have any pressure sensitivity like you would with an actual pencil or paintbrush or a tablet. So if you don't press really hard when you have a paintbrush, you have a nice thin line. If you press really hard with a paintbrush, the line gets thicker the harder you press. With a tablet, the pressure sensitivity is built in, but with a mouse, you don't have that. So you have to go through and add the thickness to the line, which is called a line weight, yourself. It takes a lot of extra time to do that, but it's really worth it because it makes the end product look really, really awesome. Another thing to take note of is that I do tend to sketch in a bunch of different colors, and I do this because I also tend to sketch on a bunch of different layers. It makes it easy if I decide after I've sketched the eyes that I don't like the shape of the nose or it's too close to one eye, but the eyes are really in a good place. I can go back and edit that nose without having to worry about accidentally erasing part of the eye, and doing things in a different color helps me know, okay, these are both blue, so they're on the same layer. So once you get it the way you want it, I went ahead and saved it as a PNG file, and this is the final image. And it's important to save it as a PNG because you can save it with a transparent background. Now you can see on the screen I'm toggling the background on and off here, and that checkered bit means there's no background, so it's transparent. So you want to make sure you save it where it's transparent. If you save it as a JPEG and it's transparent, it's not going to save transparent. You can copy and paste a layer, but I like to go ahead and save when I've finished part as a finished PNG file, just in case something happens with that layer and I go back and edit it and forget that I've edited it and I need that original bit. So I'm going to save it first as a JPEG so I can show you what happens when you save it as a JPEG. So you can see the transparency is turned off. I'm going to go up here and click on JPEG and save it. And then I'm going to open a new page. I'm just going to drag and drop it in there. You can see that the thumbnail is white, and then under it, I'm going to turn it off, and under it I'm just going to scribble a green line. So then I'm going to turn that layer back on and the green line disappears because the background is not transparent. It defaults to white when you save it as a JPEG. So I'm going to go back to that original document and change it to a PNG image. It's kind of right in the middle. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing I did before. I'm just going to drag it and drop it into that new document over that green scribble. And you can see the thumbnail. It still looks like it has a white background, but when I drag it in, you can see the green scribble under it. The background's transparent. The thumbnail just defaults the transparency to white. So make sure you save it as PNG image. Once you've done that, I like to go ahead and start a new document with everything that I need reference-wise in it, because now I don't need pictures of the cats. I already got my cat. And what I'm going to do after I have fixed the border is I'm going to start adding my constellation of my stars. I did have a couple of specific constellations in mind. I ended up going with the Leo constellation for obvious reasons. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a constellation from a reference image, and then I'm going to put a layer over it in a color that I can see really well, and I'm going to set that to overlay so that I'm not doing white stars over a white reference image, so I can see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to delete all of the surrounding black so that it's just that reference image and I don't have any overhang. Then I'm going to go to the bottom of the brushes where the special effects brushes are, and I'm going to grab the star brush, and I'm just going to vary the sizes of the stars, and I'm going to match it up with the reference image where the large stars are. I'm going to put a large stars, and then I'm going to connect everything with a line. And then I'm going to sparsely scatter the stars around with the star brush. I don't want too many of those burst type stars because that would ruin the effect. And I'm going to do all of this on a different layer. So the constellation is on a layer, and then the other stars will be on a layer, and then I'm going to switch brushes to a scattered round brush, and that's going to be on a separate layer as well. So you can see in the original reference that I have that was my inspiration, the frog, it has star-shaped stars and also some round dot stars. And so I'm going to just kind of randomly add the round dot stars, and I'm going to vary those in size as well. Doing that will give you kind of a illusion of depth, like some look further away so they're smaller and some are closer so they're bigger. And every size change I make, I'm also going to add on a new layer. I will go through and name my layers so that I know most of the time what's on them when I have this many, but I don't often work with this many layers. Then I'm going to erase what I don't want, and I started looking at it and I decided, I really like those star-shaped stars in the original. So I went ahead and did a star shape that I could use as a stamp, just copying and pasting it over and over and over again. And I changed out all of the starburst stars with star-shaped stars. And again, I did this on a different layer because I didn't want to lose all of the progress that I had made with my starbursts, changing them with the star shapes if I ended up not liking it as much. I called over some of my coworkers and asked opinions, and we did end up liking the star shapes a lot better than the starburst stars, and so that was what we ended up choosing as the final product, which you can see on the screen. Once you've got everything the way you want it, you want to go ahead and save it. Now, I did forget to turn my transparency off for this final bit, so you'll see when I do the repeat pattern that it will have a background. So you could leave it like this and put it on a t-shirt or a bag or whatever you would like, but you can also make it into a linear repeat pattern. So what I'm going to do for that is I'm just going to use the grid lines that are in Krita, and like I said in my last video, you just drag from the ruler in order to make a grid, and I'm going to do a couple of different versions. I started out with a diagonal, and I ended up not quite liking the diagonal and going with a straight up and down pattern. And so what you do is you just set up your grid in whatever distance you want, and since you're going to be copying and pasting, you only have to size the image once. And then you just copy and paste one line. So I'm going to just do one diagonal line, and then I'm going to merge all those layers together, copy it, and just keep pasting it until I've filled up the page. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing in order to create a linear version. And like with the different versions of stars, what I did was I did both of them on separate layers, and then I toggled back and forth between the two to see which one I liked better, and it ended up being the linear version that I liked much better than the diagonal version. It just seemed more complete. And then what you want to do is, if you have any extra space left over, you can see kind of in this image here that I have this little line at the edge where it looks like there's going to be some space left over. I just resized my canvas, going by what measurements the rulers told me that space was, so that I would have less space there. And then I saved it as a PNG file. You can save it as a JPEG for the next step. It doesn't really matter which one it is. So the next thing we're going to go over is the toss pattern. This, again, the same process is the same for resource gathering, and I decided I wanted to do origami animals and origami leaves. So I went and grabbed a bunch of different pictures of origami animals, and what I'm going to do is put those pictures in Krita, and then I'm going to trace them over just with the line tool and the Bezier curve tool until I have some nice outline shape. You want to make sure that the line that you use is thick enough that when you actually blow up the pattern so that it's the actual size you want it, that you'll be able to see it. So if you use like a little 1 point line, you won't be able to see that when the image is like 1 inch across. So just keep that in mind. Once you finish drawing everything, what I like to do is leave all of those raw resources in a document and then open a new document and import just those raw resources into the new document, and then line them up nice and neat all in the same layer so that you can just select whichever item you want and then copy and paste it into the position you want it in, so that you aren't losing any of your original files if something were to go wrong. Make sure that you save often and regularly. If you spend like 30 minutes doing something and getting it just right, make sure you're saving it as you go along, because sometimes the power might blink or the computer might lose power if you're using a laptop. Krita does autosave, but if you are actively drawing something when it would normally autosave, it won't autosave because the program is busy. So I did have that happen a couple of times. We had some bad weather. I had the program crash a few times between my screen recording and the large Krita files. A lot of the memory got taken up on the computer that I was using, so it crashed a couple of times. So don't repeat my mistakes. Save often. So once you have everything in the document that you want it in, what we're going to do is we're going to open a document that can be divided equally. So I got a document that was 30 centimeters by 30 centimeters. And then what you're going to do is put the guides down at 10 centimeters apart. You don't have to use centimeters. You can use inches if you want to. Just keep in mind, the bigger the document, the more memory it uses, the slower the program is going to run. You're going to divide the document equally into squares. So I did mine 10 centimeters across, 20 centimeters across, and then 20 to 30 is the edge of the document. And then again, horizontally, 10, 20, 30. And so you should have a square right in the middle, and that's the square we're going to use to make our pattern. It's a little hard to see the guides in the recording just because they're so small. But what you want to do is place your, in this case, animals the way you want them. And anything that overlaps over one line, you're going to select up to the line, copy it, and paste it on the other side of that line on the inside, not on the outside, so that it's going to be a seamless repeat. And I say copy paste, not just select and move, because you do need that original uncropped version in order to do the colors later. So just kind of lay everything out the way you want and get the composition right. And then what we're going to do is take the cropped version and we're going to compress it all into one layer. And we are going to copy and paste the squares next to each other on those guidelines so that we are creating one big seamless pattern. And then when we remove the guidelines, you can see that the pattern has repeated and there's no gaps. Now, in order to color everything, if you saved everything on a different layer, you just need to pull up those layers. So I have all my leaves on a layer, and then all of my animals are on a different layer. Select Opaque Replace by right-clicking and going down all the way to the bottom and select Opaque Replace. And I'm using the gradient tool in order to color these leaves in fall colors, and I also did a spring color version. Just play around and see what you like the best, and I did the same for each animals, so animals aren't just one solid color. So I went and did a few different gradient versions, and I did a lot of different versions for each of these animals, you guys, just to see what I liked best. You can use a palette if you need to for these gradients. Some of the lighter ones, like the swans are all white most of the time, but I did incorporate like some pinks and blues in there. And then I did rabbits, and rabbits, they're all shade of brown, but I already had a bear. So I tried to do different values of the same color. So you'll see me going through the different versions of some of these, like that first bear I put up there kind of blended in with those red leaves a little bit too well. But once you have everything done, you can reorder them as you like and then redo the pattern so that it's spread out through the whole page again, just to make sure that no gaps have appeared since you've had to copy and paste the new cropped square with color. You want to make sure all the colors match up as well. Play around with different versions of a design so you can see I did several different versions of the design, and I like to think of them as different times of year in the forest. So like the green one is the spring or the summer, and then you have the change of leaves from the green into the yellow and the red and the orange, and a whole bunch of different things. And then I also went and changed the leaves out for stars to make them look like snowflakes. And I changed the animal colors to what color they would be in the winter. So some foxes turn white in the winter and some rabbits do as well. So I changed those. And then I ended up with a whole new pattern. Okay guys, the last thing we're going to talk about are edge patterns. For an edge pattern, I wanted to do something a little bit more intricate with a little bit more detail, so I decided to do a skyline. And I picked Paris because Paris is very iconic. You know exactly what you're looking at, even if you just kind of catch it at a glance. Most of the time you'll see a skyline is just like a silhouette. It's just black on white and it looks like a shadow. I wanted to do a sketch style with a watercolor coloring style. So I went and pulled some sketches of Paris that I liked to use as a reference for the style, and just pulled some watercolor as a use for what watercolor looks like, because I'm not familiar with watercolor. I've never used it. Then I'm going to open a new document in Krita, and I used the legal size, and I'm going to import images of the monuments and landmarks that I want to use for this pattern, and I'm going to set a scale. And I'm just going to do this by deciding how big I want the biggest thing on my pattern to be. I know I want to do a skirt, and I know I want this to be the edge of a skirt all the way around. So what I'm going to do is I am going to decide how big I want the Eiffel Tower to be, and from there I'm going to decide how big I want everything else in relation to that. So I set everything to inches, and I decided I wanted the Eiffel Tower to be about 6 inches tall. It's a pretty wide edge on a skirt edge. And then I put my guideline down at 6 inches down the page, and then I just imported my pictures and set them up on that guideline. You'll also see some bright pink scribbles and writing, and that is notes on the composition of these pictures. These buildings are not next to each other in real life, so they're not going to blend right into each other one after the other. And since it's not a silhouette, it's actual line art, there's going to be space in there that doesn't match up that I need to make up off the top of my head. This is an artistic license. So if I felt like I needed to add a tree, I drew a little tree there. If I felt like I needed to extend buildings to blend into other buildings, I made a note. I wrote a little rectangle and then I made a note there. Those things might not exist in real life. That's okay. That's why artistic license exists. If you need to add a tree to make your drawing look right, add a tree. It's okay. Nobody's going to judge you for adding a tree. So what I'm doing is I am setting up some space between my lines because I'm going to put everything in the order that I want it in, and then I'm going to shrink it down to just 2 lines, because when I end up doing this, I'm going to have to custom paint this on fabric because it's so detailed and intricate, and I'm probably going to use stencils, and more about stencils a little bit later. And I'm going to leave a little space between so that I know that everything is exactly the same width. So I know that the bottom is going to match up because I'm lighting everything up on a guideline, but I need to make sure that the top is also going to match up so I don't accidentally go over that 6 inches. So that's what that purple space you see between everything is. If you need to cut something in half to make it fit while you work with it, you can do that because you can just line it back up later. If it's not perfect, that's okay. You can draw it perfect. Once I have my 2 lines done, I'm going to save everything. I'm going to save all those layers. I'm going to make a copy of those layers as just one solid thing. So I'm going to flatten the layers together and I'm going to save everything. So if I need to go back and make a change to one individual thing, I can do that. And then I'm going to open a new document. And I'm going to pick a line to work on, and then I'm going to pick just 1 or 2 things from that line to work on. And I picked the bottom line, and I am going to work on the Basilica of the Sacred Heart, the building on the left, and Notre Dame, the building on the right. So what I'm going to do is set up a guide so that I know that they're lined up correctly on the bottom, and then I'm going to mess with the pictures to get a more detailed composition. So I liked the tree on the side of the Basilica here, and I decided to use that as a way to blend into the trees next to Notre Dame. And then I decided I did not like the angle at which the Basilica was in this picture, and I didn't like the colors washed out from the angle of the sun, so I went and got another picture of the Basilica at a better angle towards the middle of the day with no clouds so that I could really see that beautiful cream colored stone the building's made out of. Then I used a combination of the Bezier curve tool, the freehand tool, and the brush stabilization tool to do tracings of what I saw in the pictures. And I'm going to emphasize that I traced what I saw. So you'll see some of these statues just are squiggly lines, and that's because I couldn't get close enough to them to see the detail in the statue. That's not a bad thing. If I were standing in front of the basilica in real life, in order to see the entire basilica, I wouldn't be able to get close enough to those statues to see exactly what they are. And you'll see those green statues, there's a man in front of them in the picture. That's several feet above his head. There's no way he could get close enough to see the details of the face of that statue if he was drawing it. That's okay. It's important to draw what you see, not necessarily what you know is there. Once you're happy with your line art, you can leave it that way or you can color it. I decided to color it, and I didn't trace the trees, I just did those in paint. And I'm using the watercolor brushes, and those are the brushes with the green on them in the tray. And I'm working on different layers for every color, and I'm just using different shades of green in order to show where light is. So lighter green is where the sun's really hitting the trees, and darker green is the shadows. And what I am also going to do is, once I have decided I like these trees, I'm going to merge all those layers together, and then I'm going to go through and I'm going to erase the parts that are building. That way, when I go back to color the building, I can put that layer under the tree because the tree is in front of the building and I don't have to worry about coloring inside the lines. I can just color the building. For the top of the building, I went through with the select tool with the Bezier curve, and I selected it so that it wouldn't color outside of that selection. So I didn't have to worry about staying in the lines. I turned off the visibility for the picture for most of the painting, but I would occasionally turn it back on just to see where windows were. And I'm doing the same trick with the windows that I did with the trees. I colored everything in that cream color that the stone is, and then I went in back and erased the windows so I could later put something under the layer with the cream color and put those windows in. I like to go about doing shadows first and then do the details, but however you like to do art is however you like to do art. And again, I'm taking artistic license with the shadows because I can. Honestly, that's the only reason. You don't have to go with the shadows, and you can do whatever you want. I didn't even color in all of the windows in some places. Some places I made them shadows because you can see there's a lot of railings, there's a lot of detail, and I didn't want so much detail that it would be lost when it got scaled down to 6 inches high, because I can zoom in, 100,000% on this screen and see every single pixel, but that's not going to do anything when I go to have this printed on a piece of fabric. I'm not going to be able to do that. So if you're not going to see that detail, there's no point in adding it. You just want to make sure that it looks good in the bigger picture. So remember to scale out and look at what you're doing frequently. You can also see I've got my palette set up to the side, and I do that before I do anything else. I decide what kind of palette I want to use for the color before I get right into it. And I used the same tree palette on the Basilica as I did for Notre Dame so that the trees would blend. You'll see in the end, I'm going to add the Arc de Triomphe, and I did the arc in a different document at a different time. Actually, I did the arc before I did the Basilica or Notre Dame when I was learning how to use these watercolor brushes. So the style looks different, and the trees are done with a different palette, so they don't exactly blend together super well. In the future, I may go back and change that. Once you have everything together, if you have something in another file, like I did, you want to make a new file or make sure you've saved this file and add that new layer in. And then what you're going to do is blend them together. So again, you can see that the trees on the Arc de Triomphe, this building that I have added to the far left in a tan color, don't exactly match. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to blend them together so that in the final picture, it looks like the trees are just fading into each other. Now, you could leave it there because all you want is the edge, but I wanted to give you guys a finished product. So what I did was I mashed everything together on that layer, I flattened the layer, and then I'm going to go with those watercolor brushes and I'm just going to add a sky. And these watercolor brushes are super, super easy to use, you guys. This is the second time I'm attempting a sky with the watercolor brush. And you can see that I have 3 brushes on this palette that are watercolor brushes, and 2 of those brushes are really just the same type of brush with a bit of a different texture. And one of those brushes I ended up not using at all because I did not like it. So this is mostly done with 2 brushes and a blend tool. And another thing to take into consideration when you're using a style brush like the watercolor brush is instead of using a regular eraser, the eraser I have erases in nice hard lines, you can turn the watercolor brush into an eraser, again, if you go back to that video in Krita, by clicking the eraser up at the top and using that as an eraser instead because it erases in the same style and the same opacity setting. So this is the final product for these 3 monuments. The finished product is probably going to take me maybe a year or more to do because there are 17 monuments in total that I'm going to have to do by hand, and then I'm probably going to have to stencil everything onto fabric myself because printing this is a little bit of a complicated process. For printing, we have some great books that you can find in the Montgomery Room on the 2nd floor of the Morgan Library by this wonderful author called Natalie Shannon. She is an Alabama designer and she has her own boutique, and she has several books about creating your own wardrobe that inspired this surface design video. And she has a lot of different methods for how to embellish the items of clothing you create. She has a lot of sewing patterns available of basic garments that you can alter for yourself, and she has a lot of instructions on how to make your own stencils, how to embroider things, how to add beading to things, and she even has some stencils in her books that you can use on your own items. So I really recommend you take a look at these books when you're deciding how to put things that you have designed onto fabric or clothes. You can also use a website like Spoonflower, where all you have to do is upload your finished image into Spoonflower and it will print it for you. And there are other companies like Spoonflower that you can upload images to, and they will print out pattern fabric for you if you want to sew a garment or a bag completely from scratch. You can design your own fabric and then you can order it and they will send it to you. You can also get some printer paper from a craft store like Hobby Lobby or Michaels chemicals that you can run through your printer and then iron onto a shirt or fabric. Or you can use vinyl if you have a vinyl cutter and a heat press. I really hope you guys enjoyed this series on surface design, and I hope it's inspired some of you guys to get into surface design or art in general, and I hope that you guys will consider sharing some of the things that you make in any stage of the process, from a sketch to a finished outfit, after watching these videos with us on Facebook. And remember to check our Facebook regularly for new videos and new programs from some of the other great clubs and librarians here at Montgomery City County Public Library. Well, that is it for this video. Stay safe, you guys, and stay crafty.